All right, a very warm welcome. And in case you don't know by the slides, for some reason we have a little glitch on the presentation. Here, what we are about to discuss is the rise of deep tech and the implications that the rise of deep tech, changing requirements, changing personalities, changing business models, changing development cycles for deep tech startups have for the programs that we as policymakers, that we as ecosystem leaders, curators, agencies operate. We want to discuss broadly ideas, concepts, explore what are the changes, what are the differences that we already see today, and what do we expect as deep tech is continuing to rise and we are dealing with very different support needs of our entrepreneurs. So that's us here in the panel. My name is Stefan, partner at startup Genome, and it's my great pleasure to first of all introduce the panel. Allow me to go from left to right. Masaru-san from CIC, operating out of Boston and Japan, and you're doing a lot of work in that space. So Masaru, please.
A lot of CIC stands for Cambridge Innovation Center, and our headquarters is located in Cambridge, in Massachusetts. And we have great tie with MIT. That's why we love deep tech. And we started CIC Tokyo back in 2020, and CIC Tokyo is getting to be our largest innovation center in Japan. We have around 300 companies having office there, and deep tech is one of our focus because Japan has a lot of potential of deep tech, but maybe any of you don't know deep tech startup from Japan. That's why we feel the potential of the deep tech startups, and we collaborate with Japanese government and other entities to promote more deep tech startups. And one more thing to add, I'm a founder and a director of the co-founder and the director of the Startup Ecosystem Association Japan, that is to promote the Japanese startup ecosystem. It has a lot of potential, so I'm really happy to talk about the deep tech here with you all.
So happy to have you. I bet we are going deep into what's happening in Japan and the great potential in deep tech.
Thank you.
Dr. Kate Koenig, lovely to have you representing Melbourne, representing the state of Victoria, and we had a little discussion around the great opportunities, but also the elements that we still need to address in order to make deep tech even more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. We're on a journey here in Victoria. We've had phenomenal growth. Our startups have grown from around 1,000 to close to 4,000 in 6 years. The vast majority of them are software as a service, and only 6% of our startups actually have a relationship with the university system. So we see very small amounts of deep tech, and it's an area that we've got a huge interest in because we've got phenomenal research capabilities here. It's that age-old problem about how do you commercialize research. So it's a learning journey for us, and I'm looking forward to learning some things today.
And we surely will unpack that. Even when we look out of the windows, we see leading university clusters here in Melbourne so close to us. So what's happening there, we will unpack that a little bit. Raymond, Senior Vice President at MDEC, based in Kuala Lumpur. Glad to have you. We've had many discussions around the scale-up segment, scale-up potential, the evolving requirements, the evolving opportunities you see in Malaysia and in the region around deep tech.
Absolutely.
Very warm welcome.
So the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation, we began in 1996 as a government agency driving the Multimedia Super Corridor Initiative that really, put ICT into the economy, right? So the digital economy is now 23.2% to the country's GDP, and continues to grow. And we've seen evolution over the last 25 years where we landed, firstly the big companies, the Microsofts of the world and so on and so forth. And now where we're going into is really how do we integrate deep tech into some of the sectors that is a key focus of the economy, right? We're looking to see whether the quadruple helix or the triple helix plus one is how I put it. How do deep tech really solve real everyday problems, around climate, around other economic inclusivity agenda and the rest, right? So that's something really that we can unpack later on as well.
Pleasure to have you. And last but certainly not least, my great pleasure to introduce Adi Barel, coming from New York or Tel Aviv, depends. Adi, you are leading the global outreach of EIT, one of the large European programs, particularly focused on activating deep tech, helping the growth of the segment across Europe and way beyond. Lovely to have you.
Thank you, Stefan. I am coming from the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. We have about 8 knowledge innovation communities focusing on global challenges, climate, energy, digital. We can say mainly focusing on deep tech, and we also just launched a big deep tech initiative which we will discuss later on in the panel. Thank you.
You know, we are Startup Genome, we love talking numbers, and when we analyze Tel Aviv as a place for deep tech development and the propensity of startups in deep tech succeeding and scaling, it's extraordinary. So congratulations, something of that work is clearly hugely effective. So thanks for joining us. Before we start, what is our problem statement here in our research? When we look at programs, incubation, acceleration, and mentorship networks, we all as policymakers, as ecosystem curators have built over the years. They are possibly today 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old, if not older, mostly publicly supported with public finance. And we ask ourselves increasingly the question, are they still fit for purpose for deep tech? Deep tech, 42% in our research globally of startups we would classify as deep tech. Complex hardware, software combinations, AI, whatever, falls into that buzzword and broader definition. It's driving growth all across the world, so the segment is becoming more important. And personally, I am a strong believer in saying, if we don't use deep tech in order to innovate ourselves out of climate crisis, to improve health, to improve mobility solutions, etc., we don't stand a chance in the future. So the importance is incredibly clear. We ask ourselves the question, is what we are offering to our entrepreneurs, who are a different beast in deep tech, are we offering them the right support mechanisms, the same love, care, support, structured knowledge, access to structured knowledge that they need, that they require and deserve so much? Before we go there, and maybe starting with you, Kate, what do we really understand in deep tech? Maybe we should define that a little more, because some things, in the end, from a support perspective, might not be that different, whilst others are behaving very, very differently. Maybe let's start just for a minute, allow us to define buzzwords, and speak a common language around topics.
I think the startup ecosystem is renowned for having really fluffy definitions around some words, and different groups will, even in Victorian ecosystem, different groups will classify startups differently. LaunchVic, we describe a startup as a technology-driven company that is global, disrupting, innovating, and we design a deep tech as a subset of that, as a startup that's using technology, almost always hardware. We do include AI increasingly in the way that we look about deep tech, but it would certainly include medtech, biotech, and pharma, which are core strengths of our ecosystem here. And that in itself is problematic, because I think the needs of different deep tech companies can be really different. So for an example, a drone company that is looking to do, one of our great local companies is called Swoop Aero. It uses drones to deliver medical supplies and spot bushfires and the like, and do a whole lot of public good using drone technology. They are a deep tech, but they've made use of generalist programs that have accelerated them, and so that is perhaps different from a medtech pharma, where you've got distinct regulatory environment that means that there's some very distinct routes that you need to go down to be able to support that sort of deep tech. So I don't think you can categorize deep tech and the pathway of deep techs really neatly. But one thing we feel about deep techs is they are using, it's not just your straightforward software as a service company. There needs to be something much more advanced about the technology that is important there.
Do you think we can describe a little bit better what's so different? What are the most important differences in support needs? What are our founders who are in a bioscience environment, into an agtech new food environment, something more complex from that perspective? What are they looking for most? What they're asking for?
I think the biggest challenge is actually looking at the pathway to venture. And deep tech often has much larger capital costs in the development, longer timeframes to get to market. So you think about a medtech or a pharma or a biotech, a SaaS company might be 5 to 7 years, a medtech pharma might be 15 to 20 years. They have a regulatory environment. Medtech biotechs have to go through clinical trials and have a whole pathway to that. And they're also really challenging markets for venture to invest in. And I think that's also a lens that you can apply to deep tech. Is this a company that your average run-of-the-mill tech VC would choose to invest in? And I think for many companies, when the answer is no, they almost automatically fall into some sort of deep tech if they meet the startup threshold in the first place. Medtech, biotech, it's really hard to get early stage capital when your return on investment's 15 years. In agriculture, it's really hard to get a return on investment when equipment's only been used for 4 weeks of the year during the fruit picking season or the harvesting season, and the rest of the year expensive equipment is lying dormant. So the venture model can actually almost help you define what your deep tech is, because where venture says no, there are more problems you have to solve, and then it's what policies can you put in place to help unlock that potential funding, which ultimately goes back to the root cause of supporting founders along their journey, which might be money for prototype development, thinking about university research commercialization, targeting a different sort of entrepreneur from your run-of-the-mill startup. So.
You mentioned venture, the much longer investment cycles. Triggers a thought, Masaru-san, you in our pre-discussion, you clearly brought out the much stronger need to engage traditional corporations, strategic investors, not the CVCs that are in for a capital return necessarily. Yeah. Maybe an evolution of the funding model in deep tech. What do you see?
Yeah, exactly. As Kate mentioned, deep tech needs money, capital, and it requires a lot of time to run this. And sometimes in the particular area of the deep tech, it is really necessary to collaborate with corporate. For example, pharma is a good example. You need to have some large pharma companies to buy your pipelines. Not only pharma, but also if you develop some technology related to material or energy, maybe you need to build in those technology into the supply chain of the large companies. That is the only way some particular type of the deep techs can make business. That's why how the corporates in that ecosystem are open to deep tech and invest in deep tech is really important. For example, Japan has the capacity of the manufacturing, not only automotive, but other types of the manufacturing companies. But sometimes they are not really open to collaborate with startup. That can be sometimes barrier for the startup, deep tech startups to do the business. So how let the corporates more open to the deep tech startups is one of the key for the success of the deep tech startups, especially in Japan.
And I'm really intrigued, Masaru-san. Maybe give us a few examples. So if you say corporates have a role to play, there's the funding element of it. That's okay. I think that there might be other requirements. Can I get mentorship, regulatory, technical?
Yes.
What is it really that a corporate can bring, and how do you get them to engage?
Yeah, many types. Of course, the mentorship is one of the great example. If you build some startups for the like power, like electricity, you need to have some help from the mentors who really knows about the energy systems in that country, right? And of course, the other types of the support, for example, being a customer of the startups is really important. If you have some technology to, for example, decarbonize your supply chain, if the no corporates buy in that technology to decarbonize your supply chain, that's going to be a problem for startups. So there's a various types of the support the corporates can provide, but the important thing is really being open to the deep tech startups, because otherwise the corporates can be very conservative or defensive to new technology. That will be a barrier for the various types of the support, providing the mentorship or being a customer or providing a capital to the startups.
Yeah. Adi, you're doing a lot of work with very different cultures all across Europe. Changing support needs. What are the entrepreneurs asking? What are they expecting from EIT? And are the corporates, at least in Europe, playing along or not so much?
Yeah, I mean, my experience is within EIT, but also with Israel. So maybe I will just give my thoughts about that. So in order to understand the support that entrepreneurship need today, maybe I will take you back to your university or entrepreneurship class. We are talking about the value of death. So you start up in the first day, we know that there is a value of death before they start making money or they start being profit. So when we talk about deep tech, the value of death is much deeper and much longer. That means that, as Kate mentioned, we need access to capital. It's not just capital, it's smart money. We need time, we need it to be breathable. We don't need to get the ROI very quick. But in addition to that, we have to build capacity. So we need talent. We need access to talent. When we talk about talent, it's fresh talent, but also the big corporates, they should have training programs to build their own talent within the corporate. This is the only way a corporate can actually implement and be able to access deep tech. In addition to that, you need to have a university, research institute, but also collaboration within the ecosystem and outside of the ecosystem. It's kind of a support system within the company, but also outside of the company to be able to come over and overcome the market failure of the deep tech.
Thank you. And Raymond, you mentioned to me something that I found really fascinating. You see an engagement of fairly traditional corporations, family business, family-led conglomerates, something that's maybe a little bit unusual in Malaysia. I believe that's hugely strategic coming from their perspective, engaging with deep tech. And how can they help? What are they practically doing to help entrepreneurs in that segment?
So I'll start from the other side of the fence first, which is from a government perspective. How we're looking at it is there's a finite capital resources, right? So if we rely on our funding ecosystem, as in an Asian or Malaysian context, there's not enough to go into R&D, right? So government, or at least MDEC, on behalf of the government, we have looked into providing a lot more support, infrastructure support, to ensure that founders get access to the research capabilities, to other government funding and grants, and also to market access. Now, on the other hand, we also would motivate and are motivating family offices and private enterprises to join in. Now, in Malaysia at least, 70% or 60% of the listed companies are government-linked companies, right? So you've got the Petronas of the world, you've got Felda, these are large cap companies. And those are the guys with the financial muscle, with the international presence, able to support the government's agenda. So we do intervene, we have to intervene to ensure that there's enough of an infrastructure support and enough of a demand for the deep tech that will solve the country's problems, right, first and foremost. And ideas that can scale obviously are given a bit more priority. I'm really excited that the companies such as Sunway, for example, family office, the second generation has really moved into supporting research development into areas obviously related to their area of business, but also scaling up to working with other family offices to see what other problems that can be solved. Both of the ladies are absolutely right. The gestation period to get deep tech out into a commercialization stage could be far way off, and by the time you get into the fourth year, the world has changed tremendously, right? So that ability from the government standpoint to say, I'll give you enough of a rope, but not to hang yourself, to hold you there and let you go on a little bit more as things change, I think is going to be very important. Regulatory moves are also really important as well. We function in the ambit of ASEAN, and standards, harmonization of standards, data flows, privacy and sovereignty of data, which are all absolutely required to ensure that the founders are aware of these challenges. And for deep tech to move, this, right? We need deep R&D, we need the data, we need to share data. And these issues, I think, on a regulatory standpoint is where government can play a stronger role as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, actually triggering a thought. It's maybe not directly related to incubators, accelerators, but we find in so many places we would have a great chance to build out a deep tech segment in agtech, as an example, in another applied science. If we had the right regulatory test beds, if we could emulate what we've all done many, many years ago so successfully in fintech and financial markets, the archetype of the sandbox. Do you see developments in your environments to say, let's be very proactive from a government perspective to provide that support, the safe experimentation, a safe place where I can experiment, I can prove myself, I can fail in a safe environment? And are we using that actively enough to help our deep tech entrepreneurs? Maybe Adi, you could give it up, Kate, please.
I think we don't do a huge amount of that in Victoria from a LaunchVic perspective. With government, we actually get the private sector to do it, because I think the private sector is better placed to encourage the experimentation. I think sometimes government can come to the table with a view of where the landscape is, and we want entrepreneurs that are actually thinking the next 5 years down the track. And so we see the pathway more about the entrepreneurs educating government about what the next 5 years of work is going to be. Therefore, our strategy at LaunchVic, right or wrong, has been very much about enabling private sector entities to provide the sandboxes where people can go and innovate and really push boundaries and test. And then we can feed that back into government about what the future may be. And a great example of that is AI. several years ago, LaunchVic set up a AI ecosystem accelerator hub, Boab AI, great local outfit. Government wasn't particularly interested in AI 6 years ago, whenever it was that we set that up. There was a view that it was there, it was coming. Fast forward to late last year, ChatGPT came out, and suddenly it's like, wait, what are we doing in AI? What's going on? We need more in AI. Get more stuff happening in AI. And it's great that we're seeing a move to AI, but the leaders in AI were the people who were thinking about it 10 years ago. They're not the people who are necessarily thinking about it today. There are going to be great innovations that come out of today that leverage AI, but the forefathers and mothers of the sector are the people who are already doing it, and that's been happening in the private sector. So I think there's a danger that government can actually almost get too involved in trying to set trends and agendas, and the very nature of entrepreneurship is you want the person with the really crazy idea that's out far on the left thinking of something that is going to come through and disrupt and change, and it takes time for government to move to catch up with those trends. It doesn't mean there's not a role for government. There absolutely is a role, but I think as we think about sandboxing and experimenting, actually government can be too conservative in supporting that to really experience the full potential.
Adi, do you want to add a little bit, particularly from a European perspective?
Yeah, I will give my. I do agree about the corporates' role in that, and of course they drive the market. But many times when we talk about deep tech, especially when we talk about energy, climate, health, we need the government to be the client. The government should be implementing the technology if we're talking about mobility. So the government can play a role of a client, creating the market. And I think that if we want to really promote and support those kind of initiatives, we have to have good procurement processes, supporting regulation to be able to really shorten the time to market in those aspects.
Yeah, that leads us.
Yeah, I think that is a mixture of the government and the private sector. For example, for the early stage startups until like a Series A, the governmental support is very necessary. That's why in Japan, some local city governments built a test field for the startups and built a special district with some part of the deregulation. That will help seed stage startups to do, for example, like a auto driving system or like a large drone to implement in that limited part. But for the later stage startups, like from Series B or C, they can build their own test field, sometimes collaborate with large companies. For example, you can ask Toyota to build the field for the new automotive. So that is an example, but it's a matter of the stage of the startups, and how we can bridge the public sector to the private sector is one of the important key points to thrive more deep tech startups.
Yeah, I mean, we are moving a little bit away from incubators, accelerators, but spontaneously, but on my mind, regulatory environment gives me as an entrepreneur the security that I'm developing for something that's legal, that I practically can implement. As an investor, something again that has runway here. How do we cleverly help our entrepreneurial ecosystems to have influence on regulation for technologies that are not yet really clear? And how do we possibly help them a little bit? When I look at traditional corporations, they're extremely good at preserving status quo, right? And they have armies of lawyers and the resource to do that. So how do I level the playing field here? I think in financial markets we've all done that. But are there any good mechanisms where we have hearing between both parties, the incumbents, right,
No,
and the ones who are pushing us?
So again, I said 25 years of experience. We've made mistakes along the way, right? But we also learn quickly from where the successes are. So we looked at sandboxes very seriously about 5 years ago, right? To say what is government's role inside, and how do we encourage this sandboxes to come out? The first thing that we did was a regulatory sandbox, right, which was led by an agency called Futurize. Right, so they were looking at, for example, drone technology, working together with the CCAM, which is the guys who control the flight paths, and say, what can we do around that, right? So the applications of drone can be huge, right? It could be delivery of medication, parcels, many other things, right? The monitoring of road traffic. But we needed to get the regulations out of the way. And there were multiple parties that were required for this idea to even go to the next stage, right? So do we have the proper regulatory sandbox? So we brought in, MDEC brought in a whole bunch of people. Secondly, to designate a safe zone, right? So down south in Johor, very near Singapore, we've designated a zone for drone and robotics. Safe zone, the likes of DHL and others are in there now, trialing the drones. So you've got huge drones to go into palm oil plantations that are able to take the weight of a man, 100 kgs, right up to the small drones that can deliver Coca-Cola to the 5th floor of your apartment, right? So various things being tested out in there. And obviously we'll need the data and the AI to be fed into it, right? Because from where we look at it, the drone is the drone. It's a physical equipment, but what's inside and how you program that is what's going to drive the industry forward. Then you've got the financial sandbox, because things like, for example, if you need funding right now, a lot of people are looking into crypto, right? Can you get funding via crypto or any other means of funding, right? And the current regulatory system doesn't allow that. It's difficult. So we are looking at a financial sandbox to see how we can, allow certain investment or funding to come into these new ideas. And the third, obviously, is the universities, right? Some universities are still very much silo, right? So it's also our job to try and connect the different centers of excellence in these universities to see whether the sharing of the ideas and how we can get the students' mobility moving into these areas, right? So those are some examples of what Malaysia at least is thinking about.
Fascinating. Kate, please.
Can I also just add to that comment? I think it's really important, and you can probably guess that I'm very much on the side of the entrepreneur in this debate, although we are fully funded by government, so government has a very important role to play. But I think it's really important that when we talk about regulation, that entrepreneurs have a voice. And in Australia, we've set up the Tech Council. We also have other bodies that have traditionally represented the technology sector, but they do a great job of representing the corporates in the technology sector. And the role of the Tech Council, and a big shout out to the Tech Council team, is to raise the entrepreneur's voice to actually say, hang on, this might be working over here, but for us over here, it's not working, and these are where you need to change. So I think voice of entrepreneur is really important, that they are being listened to, because they're often the canary in the coal mine. They're seeing where the problems are happening before government necessarily recognises that it is a problem. And at the same time, we have to recognise that there are groups that on certain issues don't want to see change. They don't want to see regulation change because it suits them. So it's a really, really complex landscape.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring it up, Kate. As a facilitator, you shouldn't comment, but I spent a few years with Tech City, Tech Nation UK in London, and we experienced the same issue coming first out of the financial markets, of course, and this is with traditional banking, the banking system rejecting any modern forward-looking regulation, of course. We found a way to bring startup entrepreneurs, particularly from scaling companies out of fintech, into context with larger banks, and have the regulator, the FCA, sitting in the middle, and every 6 weeks we would corral them into a sometimes unfriendly discussion, but really a regular exchange of opinion, which today transformed really the way the FCO and the financial oversight bodies are thinking about forward-looking regulation. And then we expanded that system to professions in law and elsewhere. And I think there's potential of that collaborative advocacy mechanism to really help us refresh the regulatory environment and make it much more modern and forward-looking. Examples maybe that we can leverage from the financial markets into other technology, fields of technology. I wanted to briefly pick up on Raymond. You rightfully pointed out we are in an environment where IP, the activity in universities, is so incredibly important. And wherever we go, I believe we can all nod our heads, or otherwise please disagree. We see a cultural divide. We don't see the necessary connectivity between those that are researching, the PhDs, the young researchers, the professors overseeing the research, and an on-ramp to our entrepreneurial ecosystems. I think it's prevalent everywhere I go. Certainly in Europe, very, very pronounced. We got enormous amount of opportunity sitting on academic shelves, but we are not building the right on-ramps here. So what kind of support, culture change, or whatever it is, what kind of support can we give our potential deep tech entrepreneurs, for these junior researchers? Say, I got a fantastic idea here. I want to try it out even if I fail. And I can have a career even as a researcher in a university environment, not just by doing publications, but by engaging with something that really has an impact on our lives. Maybe you have a few ideas, insights here.
Yes.
It's a conundrum. Wherever I go, nobody finds the solution, but it's a big topic.
I have some background in Japanese government. I was in Ministry of Science and Technology, and the ministry was really supportive for the entrepreneurial researchers. So the Japanese government really promote university researchers to start their own company. That was a great advocacy for the young researchers, but that was still not enough. Even young researchers say, "Oh, I want to build the company without this research outcome." Like a PI is sometimes really reluctant to do that. The senior researchers sometimes opposed to start company because the academic research is most important for some researchers still. So to do that, we sometimes provide some funding to researchers to prepare for the making startups out of their research. We call it gap fund. That is filling the gap between the academic research and the commercialization research. So giving money to the young researcher will encourage them to build their own startups out of their research. Those policy approaches we have tried for many years, and some of them are getting successful. But still, the university ecosystems are really segregated. So there's tons of good university researchers, but we cannot approach to all the universities, and there's still many universities are still in the shells of themselves. That's why we feel there's a lot of potential still in Japanese universities, but many researchers are kind of reluctant to start their own startups. Any comment?
I mean, if I can jump in, I don't have the solution, but I do think we can learn from success stories. For instance, Mobileye. Mobileye you all, do you know Mobileye, the Mobileye story? No? So Mobileye was an IP developed in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and it was backed by Intel back then, and it was purchased, one of like the multi-million-dollar companies that were purchased by Intel. Intel, was it? Yeah. And it was a success story that today the Hebrew University is celebrating and teaching their researchers that they can be the next Mobileye. And this is, I think, a success story that we should look at and see how we can have research backed by corporates, corporate involved. We have challenges coming to the academia and the research institute are working with real world life challenge and have this ongoing discussion with the industry. In addition to that, we realize that many times researchers don't have the capabilities or don't have the mentality of doing business. They want to sit there, they want to sit and do research. And many times we will build mentorship, coaching programs to really provide them with the tools and the skills that they need, mainly soft skills and business skills that they need to actually think about a venture, think about how to build their own company. And many times also we can matchmake them with the right CEO. So the researcher doesn't have to be the CEO. So I think like the cultural change, but also celebrating success and have the industry as a player in the research sector that can lead to more success stories there.
I want to pick out on one point here. In deep tech, we are dealing with a very different type of personality. Typically, we got medical doctors, we got somebody coming from chemistry, from engineering, to a good degree. Very different upbringing, very different cultural environment. What are we doing in our incubators particularly to help them experience entrepreneurship, get hooked into it, give them the support? I don't know, a friend of mine is a 55-year-old professor for neuroscience, and she's developing solutions for Alzheimer's. It's her first business ever. She's coming out of the academic environment. The conversations we have sometimes are hilarious from a funding perspective, from a setting up a business perspective. This is an absolutely fantastic brain in that specific part of life sciences, but struggling to really appreciate the entrepreneurial facets of it. So how do we help these individuals, and who are they really?
I think it's not a straightforward question, and we certainly see entrepreneurs come from many, many walks of life. The average entrepreneur is 42 years old in Australia or in Victoria, and that's, people think you have to be a uni student to, 20 years old, and designing programs for 40-year-olds is quite different from designing a program for a 20-year-old that's never even seen a business operate or a government department operate. So we have chosen to fund a couple of dedicated deep tech accelerators, and one of them is called MedTech Actuator, the other one's called And Health, both in health and life sciences. But I think there's also some really interesting things that universities can do. One of the most successful producers of medtech programs in Victoria comes out of the University of Melbourne, and that's a university master's course where they take medical and health specialists and they match them with business school students, and together they go through a year of creating a company together. And so that really early stage matching programs in a teaching curriculum can be really powerful. The other thing I'd say about universities, which links to the last question, is we have to recognize that entrepreneurship is, certainly in Australia, is not core business. And it's not funded. So teaching is funded. Number one duty of a university is to teach students, and research is funded, particularly if it's, you're a high Ivy League Sandstone University and you get grants from the federal government. Entrepreneurship's not funded, so it's really hard for the universities to build really high quality programs. And one of the very anecdotal pieces that we see is that a lot of the university programs are really targeted at students. And so your professor doesn't want to go and hang out with the students that they're teaching during, the day. So how do you build programs that are really high-powered and respected in the university? And I would certainly look to MIT and Bill Ollett and the work that he does. You've got a preeminent entrepreneur that's had 3 exits, heading the entrepreneurial programs. And if you've got such an esteemed entrepreneur that's had major exits, as a researcher, you would go to that person to ask for advice. When you've got an entrepreneur agency within an accelerator within a university that's run by a probably former academic that's moved into the professional side, deeply passionate about innovation, but doesn't have a lot of real-world experience, and may not have had a serial exit themselves or an exit or multiple exits, it's not as attractive. So I think there's a whole end-to-end of how you have to look at it, and that's why the problem's not solved, is it's so complicated. But I do think you have to build the right programs that are going to attract people, and there are inquisitive entrepreneurs in every walk of life. We have entrepreneurs who are 18 years old, we have entrepreneurs that are 70 years old. We have to think about how are we attracting them into programs and making them feel safe. We have the discussion about women, we have the discussion about First Nations, we have the discussion about cold, but we also have to have a discussion around age in entrepreneurship and personality and what makes people feel safe to learn. And that targets all of us as individuals, and I don't think we give enough attention to designing programs that then encourage a researcher to go into a program.
Yeah.
So.
I'm really intrigued. Do you see at CIC, at EIT, do you see the spread, or is it the young graduates that are coming to you? And what does that mean for the programs you run?
Yes, right. As Kate suggested, it is really important to provide some channels for the researchers to access. Bill Ollett is one of the example. The university researchers can come in and talk and sometimes meet with the CEO of the company potentially, because researchers cannot be the CEO in most cases. So we try to provide many channels for the young researchers. So for example, we do a lot of events to match the university researchers with the other resources, including the potential candidate for the CEO of the company. So providing such channels, especially for the not large universities, is really important. Large university like MIT has own resource and own channel to connect the researchers to the outside resources, but a smaller university doesn't have. That's why having such channels for the young researchers in like an incubator is very important for the ecosystem. That's why we are doing that.
Thank you. So there are 2 or 3 angles to look at here, and I think the first one, at least from our lenses, is the academic tenure. Right, so when the professors or researchers or academics in a particular university, they go into a deep dive into their sector, which is what they're meant to do anyhow, right? And a lot of them are concerned with putting the papers out that holds on to their tenure as they move up. And that sits somewhere, right? It's graded and it's peer reviewed and it sits somewhere. So we've seen this to be a gap, right? And how do we harness the IPs that we talked about earlier on? How do we put it out? There's another program that we run, it's called the Corporate Innovation Program, where we have the corporates coming out to put out problem statements, and we feed in our entrepreneurs and our startup founders into this program. What's lacking here is that we should build on some of the IPs that have been done already in the space, right? So we don't have full visibility of what's gone on over the last 10 years, and I'm sure there's been a lot of research that we can build on and do better. A good example recently was a professor, a young dude, 45 plus, in one of our universities, who's moved into the Islamic digital economy, right? So, but the problem there, and he shared that very openly with us, was that the university took a dim view of him, going commercial, and said, well, if you want to do that, then you have to leave your job and then go on, and best of luck to you. But not within the structure of some of the more well-established universities. For example, Uppsala in Sweden has got such a great program that's going on, and the amount of IPs that's coming out of that universities is fantastic, right? And in terms of unicorn ratios for a 10 million population, that's the highest, right? So we went there to just have a look and see, and that's where we spotted that gap, right? The universities, the academics, at a very early age, seeing that how should I commercialize my research? Who can I partner with to get this off the ground and not just leave it as a research paper? There's a difference probably I see in terms of culture of our researchers, right? And that culture perhaps needs to be switched about. But on the good side, we see the doctors, we see the engineers right now who are 21, 22, who are immediately flipping on the other side, right? They want to be the next unicorn. They want to be the next superstar in tech, right? Not necessarily becoming the best surgeon. They're looking to see how technology can come into doing a post-mortem remotely, and funny ideas coming up in there. So I think we'll reach a point of balance soon enough, within the next couple of years, to see how we can balance this off.
Perfect. Moving us a little bit away from the entrepreneur perspective, when I think about the leaders, the ones who are running incubation programs, acceleration programs, mentorship networks, and deep tech, I mean, these are very small segments. So how many other AgTech incubation acceleration environments, to stay with the example, do you have in your home city? Whom can you ask for advice, for share experiences? I think it's a pretty small minority. Do you see any networks of similarly minded leaders of programs that are coming together, exchanging their experiences, a peer learning network in that space? From our perspective, that would be really something novel.
I think the World Economic Forum has got a great program, right? The Center for Fourth IR and the rest, Malaysia is part of that as well. I think it's these networks that will provide a lot of value to any ecosystem, right? So having gone into the drone program and now the Center for Fourth IR and a couple of others coming on, those verticals and the cross verticals engagements are super important, right? So we have to be part of that global ecosystem to also understand what's coming up, in other countries. You'll be, shocked to see the kind of developments in technology that's coming out of Africa, for example, right? And what they're doing in the Middle East, not necessarily in the Western democracies only, right? So I think those kind of engagements and sharings and things like this, what we're doing here through the GEN is spot on. Right?
I can't agree anymore. But for some specific sectors, like pharmaceutical sectors, there's some international network. There's a lot of conference related to innovation in the life science or innovation in the biotech. For those sectors, I can see the network and the knowledge sharing between the accelerators and the investors. But for other sectors, deep tech in general, I cannot see international or global network yet. I can see many types of the network sharing the knowledge inside one country, but it's really domestic. So I'm feeling this Global Entrepreneurship Congress or Startup Genome can be one of the hub to connect the deep tech supporters or accelerators. We really need it.
Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm intrigued because you find that in research, right? We got university networks totally globally, but for those, and I've been running programs myself, whom do I ask? Where's my peer that helps me? Somebody probably coming new into that function. Can we create knowledge networks? Maybe it's us, a Gen community. We need to have a discussion with Jonathan and others in the organization to say what's the potential here. Is there a real need, and how can we better help those that are highly specialized? I believe, and you're doing that to a degree with EIT.
Yeah, I mean, the EIT is a demonstration of that. So what we have is knowledge innovation communities in different sectors, sharing and codifying knowledge, best practices in the specific sector. So that's what we are doing for the past 12 years in a pan-European aspect, and in the past 4 years we are doing it also in the global aspect. So we have hubs across the globe, in Tel Aviv, in San Francisco, and we are also sharing knowledge between the European community and other communities outside of Europe.
Nadi, would that help the very personnel, the CEOs, the leaders, the managing directors of these programs? Let's say it's an acceleration program in a field of deep tech. Would they, through EIT, have the ability to share their experiences, learn?
Yeah, I mean, so what we do basically is we bring these leaders of accelerator, incubator, and we bring them to different ecosystems in the world, and we teach them the know-how, the best practices, and we let them, one, talk to each other, because sometimes they don't even talk to each other, and second, learn and engage with leading ecosystem and best practices. After that, we incentivize them in micro grants, not something too big, to implement best practices in their own incubator, meaning they are going to improve, ongoing improvement and learning from outside of their country.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's really a need we hear so many times. Yeah? You find somebody who really tries to build one of the best programs, but is a very, very lonely soul in a particular community. It's a bit different to the higher density we have in the traditional models outside of deep tech. Changing tech a little bit for the last few minutes. We've been talking a lot about how do we get ideas out of research? What are the programs here? What are we doing to help encourage more entrepreneurship with scientists, with researchers? The other end of the spectrum, how do we encourage more scaling success in deep tech, given the long cycles, the high risks, the high capital needs? Because in the end, I'm coming a little bit here from the clean tech angle, but if we don't create scale-ups, we have no impact. We are not protecting the climate, and the same goes for the employment effects and so on and so on. And I think this applies all across deep tech. What are the best angles here that you have seen? Is it the close corporate collaboration? What are other ways to really scale a deep tech company?
We don't, I can't say I can contribute to this because we don't have enough deep techs that are scaling in, there are certainly one or two, but we haven't had enough interaction.
Well, you suddenly got a fascinating alternative concrete manufacturer.
Yeah,
I had the pleasure of learning all about it yesterday night.
We certainly do. And, but I think the one thing that we definitely see in our scale-ups is there's a whole lot of behind-the-scenes back office work that needs to be done to scale, which doesn't necessarily mean product market fit. It means making sure you've got the right finance team, the right operations team, the right HR talent team. You're doing marketing the right way. Growing a company from 0 to 10 is hard. Growing a company from 10 to 30 is hard. Growing a company from 30 to 100 gets tougher, and then it only gets tougher. So I think a big part of scaling is actually probably fairly homogenous amongst many companies, but I have no doubt that deep techs have niche issues that they encounter. But I don't think we should take off the eye off the ball that all scaling companies, we think it gets easier. It doesn't. It gets harder as you grow.
Yeah, I think also, in addition to that, which I agree, I think scale up, we should look at it in a more of a global level. It's not something that you can do inside your own country. Because we are talking about challenges that are global. If we solve the climate change in Berlin, we still need to solve it in other places in the world. That means that we have a client base that is international. That means that a country should understand that keeping a scale-up or keeping an IP only in the company sometimes will not be a solution to support scale-up, and we need to think globally. We need to allow companies to scale to other countries, other markets, to access global markets. This is the only way we can really tackle these deep challenges.
So we have a clear focus. We love our scale-ups. It brings us export revenue. So what do we do about this? I think market access is really important, right? So being part of the FTAs, I think is going to be extremely crucial. the digital economy partnership agreements that are increasingly coming up from the UK, Singapore, the digital economy framework agreements that are coming up. We're looking at Australia as well. These are key FTAs, which are not in the vein of the traditional FTAs, because it requires this, right? So to scale a deep tech, say medtech up to, from even Malaysia to Thailand, there's going to be many regulatory hurdles to overcome, right? And that, again, that harmonization of standards need to be thought about when you talk about scale-ups, right? Especially around deep tech. You're talking about responsible AI. Responsible AI is a platform, and different countries are approaching it completely differently, right? So I think from at least our point of view, we're encouraging our entrepreneurs to go outside of Malaysia, go into ASEAN. In my presentation yesterday, I said a lot of other countries are looking into ASEAN because ASEAN continues to grow at 5%. Malaysia is continuing to grow at 5.5%. So we just got to think about, okay, how do we help our companies now get into where the key markets are for the future? Africa is another huge area, but it's not necessarily easy to get into those markets. And really, I think that's where the government can support our scale-ups.
And Raymond, are these your foreign trade departments and agencies, or do you help
So
the
MDEC's got to handle
acceleration programs,
the whole
the
works. We do
investors
that.
and so forth?
We do that. So we have got 22 Malaysia digital hubs across Malaysia, and we put funding behind those. The corporate innovation program run by my colleague connects them with the ecosystem, whether it is a MNC or a Malaysian corporate, and from there on we do market access. Right, so we're constantly taking people out. We had missions just recently in Jakarta. We had missions in London. Even here, we've got 10 Malaysian companies here to push them into other markets. And I think that's really, from our perspective at least, how we support our entrepreneurs to scale.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for the insights. We are nearly on the hour. Just to maybe briefly summarize, I don't think we found the silver bullet to modernize our incubation, acceleration, mentorship programs. What I find remarkable, though, I think we are starting a little bit earlier at source. That's the entire discussion around programmatic support, cultural change, whatever is required to get the R&D sector stronger in. I think that's undoubtedly one of the big conundrums that we haven't solved as a world. We see good examples, but I don't think we have the perfect playbook as yet. Love more discussion around that. Certainly the appreciation that collaboration with the corporate sector and the definition of problems, but also in terms of mentorship in a sense of, can I ask an engineer? JF was talking about the scale-up scale-up report this morning, saying how important is connectedness to experts in industry. These are the engineers, the medical supervision, etc. you see in a life sciences company. The regulatory expertise that's so difficult and so much more complex to have access to that. Maybe that inspires us a little bit when we think about our portfolios in our cities. What do we need to provide here? I think we are doing well in trying to anticipate a little bit better what are deep tech trends and requirements coming up. It's easy to say, well, let's adapt to the status quo today. Let's do a survey of our founder base and try to answer to those needs, but to predict a little bit better what is happening in 5-6 years, because that's the time it typically takes to build a program portfolio and staff it appropriately. And I think we have to touch a little bit upon the scaling journey that is different. And Raymond, you put it perfectly. Getting an FDA approval is a huge task and a huge hurdle. So how do we better help our startups from that perspective to prepare for market expansion in an environment that's even harder? I believe it might be interesting to see how Europe in terms of AI regulation will fare. Pretty aggressive compared from the perspective of many. Let's see what impact that has and how can we help our entrepreneurs. And last but not least, the entire funding journey. To say we need a different venture model here. We're looking at development cycles. In the extreme, we were discussing an Imperial College startup yesterday in the life sciences space. The first patent was filed 31 years ago. The IPO was in 2 years planned. So that's in the extrema, yeah. But you can imagine the pivoting, the development, etc., and the patience that early stage investors had in that company. So a different model here. Corporates may play a role, not as CVC, more as strategic investors, the family offices you mentioned. Fascinating to see in a very traditional business, family business environment to pick up on these opportunities. So I think we got many moving pieces in this puzzle. It will be interesting to see that evolve. I think jointly should have a broader discussion around that. And maybe as a rallying cry, I love what we hear from EIT to help the leaders of our incubation, acceleration, mentorship programs to better learn from each other. And maybe we can replicate some of these ideas within the Gen family or elsewhere. I certainly would love that. Big thank you to you all for joining us. And I'm sure you're all available for further discussion. Thank you.